Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more exciting session in AWS. In this particular session, we'll basically discuss about a database service on AWS called as RDS. Okay. Now, before discussing about RDS, okay, let us try to understand different types of databases that we have, why we need to use RDS, etc. Okay. Now, for that, let us start understanding from the data. Okay. What do I mean? So, there are different databases like a relational database. There is something called as NoSQL database. Okay. Now, why do we need different types of databases? Why do we need an RDS database? Why do we need a NoSQL database? Now, first of all, we have different types of data, right? Let's say we have something called as structured data. Okay. And we have unstructured, semi-structured data. Okay. We have unstructured data and semi-structured data. So structured data and semi-structured data. Now, if I want to store data in a relational database system, basically we need to have kind of a structured data. Okay. And here in a relational database, schema is fixed and it is defined even before we have the data. Okay. So basically in a relational database, what we'll have? Okay, we'll have a database. Inside a database, we'll have tables. Inside tables, we'll have basically data is organized in the form of rows and columns. Okay, this is how data is organized in a relational database. So if we have to define a table, first of all we have to say how many columns it should have. Okay, and we can only capture. So what do I mean by schema? Defining what is the name of the column, what kind of data you can capture, whether it is an integer or a varchar or a boolean value, etc. Okay, and that is predefined. We cannot change, or we can only capture that particular data. There is no flexibility in the schema. Okay. Now, what is a NoSQL databases? Now, let's take an example of uh, e-commerce, right? So they need some kind of flexibility in the schema. So then a relational database will not help me in that. Then how I can do? We have something called as a NoSQL database where there's a flexibility in the scheme. Okay, there's a flexibility in the schema. We use this NoSQL databases to store the data in a NoSQL database. Now, how we store the data in NoSQL database? Something like JSON documents or a key value pair. Okay, or else you can also call this JSON as JSON documents, or there is some you also call this as a document database. That's a very famous document database like MongoDB. Okay, JSON, key value, and graph. Okay, there are other NoSQL databases also. This is how data is basically stored in a NoSQL databases in the form of a JSON documents or a key value or graph. But in a relational database, data is stored in tables, rows, and columns. Okay, now AWS offers you services to store a relational databases as well, NoSQL database as well. Okay, so there are different services that AWS offers. Now, first, let us look into the RDS. What are the what is that AWS is offering for relational database services under RDS, and then we'll do a couple of hands-on exercises, and then in the coming sessions we'll discuss about NoSQL databases. All right, let me switch to my presentation. Now, what is RDS? RDS is basically a service that Amazon offers to create a relational database services. Okay, so Amazon Relational Database Services is a web service that makes it easier to set up, operate, and scale a relational database in a AWS cloud. So on AWS cloud, if you want to work with relational databases, you have a service called as RDS. You can simply call it as a Amazon RDS is a service that will help us. Now, why we need to use it? There are a couple of advantages that we get with this. One is it is very cost efficient. Okay, and it is resizable capacity. That means if you want to increase the capacity of a database, we can increase. If we want to decrease, we can decrease. Now, now, with the help of a relational database services, now there are a lot of common tasks that a database administrator has to do, like taking up of backups, making sure the database is highly available, increasing the storage space whenever it is required, etc. There are a lot of administrative tasks that we'll see in few minutes, but all those tasks are managed by AWS itself. Okay, all the administrative task is managed by AWS itself, so that it is very easy for us to just concentrating on developing the database rather than worrying about whether database is available or not. All right, that is one of the reasons why we use Amazon RDS. Now, basically, forget about RDS for some time on Amazon. So, first of all, where we can install a database or where we can run a database. We can run a database, okay, on premises. Let's say I have purchased the server. On the server, I can install a database and I can start working with that. This is one option that we have. Okay, one option is that we can have server. We can purchase a server either from Dell, HP, whatever vendor it is. Once we purchase a server, we can install or configure database on that server and we can start using the database. That is option one. Now option two, we can install a database on EC2 virtual machine. That means we can purchase a EC2 virtual machine from AWS. On top of that, we can configure or install database. This is option two. Now the third option is that we can use the service that I was telling you. The service is called as RDS from Amazon. No need to configure, no need to install, no need to purchase any server. Create an RDS database from AWS and directly connect with the app and start storing your data. These are the three options that are available. And the third option is very easy because you don't need to purchase a server. You don't need to configure, install OS on the server, install database on server. Don't worry about the versions, etc., etc. Okay, everything is taken care by AWS. Now let us compare the difference of using a database on premises versus using a database on EC2 instance versus using a database with RDS. Okay, now let us see some of the tasks and who manages that. Now let's say application optimization. So that means what? If I have to connect my application with AWS, who has to do that? Obviously the owner of the application is customer, right? So even if you're using on-premises server or AWS EC2 or RDS, the customized application customization has to be done by the customer. Now the scaling, if I want to scale the database, if it is on premises, customer has to do it. Even if it is EC2, customer has to do that. But if you have to scale a database using RDS, all you need to tell AWS is I want to scale and AWS will do that for you if you're using RDS. High availability has to be configured in case of EC2 and on premises by the customer. But in case if it is an RDS, when we are creating an RDS, we can choose an option called as high availability. That's it, and HA is configured for you. The rest of the things AWS will take care. Now, taking database backups is one of the primary tasks of database administrators. Now, if you have to take a database backup, if it is on premises or on EC2, we need to employ people. They need to take constant backups and check whether backups is failing, successful, etc. But in case of RDS, Amazon will take backup for you. You need to just define a schedule, and rest of the things is taken care by RDS. Similarly, if you need to do database patching or you need to install any database software, okay, if it is RDS, it is taken care by AWS. You don't need to worry about it. But in case of either if you're installing a database on an EC2 instance or on premises, it is the customer responsibility to work with patching or to install some software, right? Now, OS patching should be taken care by the customer itself in case of on premises or EC2. But in case of RDS, Amazon will take care of it. Okay. OS installation, same thing. The server maintenance, hardware lifecycle, power, cooling, etc. will be has to be taken care by customer in case if it is a on-premises server. But if you're purchasing a server from AWS, that is with the help of EC2, the server maintenance, hardware lifecycle is taken care by AWS because the server is on AWS. If it is RDS, obviously we know that all these things taken care by AWS itself. So now if you look at this, if you're taking a database service RDS from AWS, all that you need to do is that optimize your application. Rest of the things is taken care by AWS. Okay, it is so simple. Now let us look into some of the terminology that we use for Amazon RDS. One of the term that you'll come across is called as a DB instance. Okay. Now what is a DB instance? We can simply define DB instance is an isolated database environment in the AWS cloud. And you can also call this as a basic building block of Amazon RDS, is called as nothing but DB instance. So that means if you have to work with RDS, first of all, you have to create something called as a database instance. Okay. And when you're working with database instance, okay, now there are a lot of database engines. Like, for example, there is something called as MariaDB. Okay, there is something called as Microsoft SQL Server, and there is MySQL. Oracle is one engine. PostgreSQL is another engine. Now, does ADS supports all this? AWS supports all these six engines. Okay, and additionally, there is also Amazon word engine of RDS that is called as Amazon Aurora. We'll discuss that separately. Okay. Now, as a customer, when you're choosing AWS for your relational database by using a service called as RDS, you can work with any of these engines. If you are comfortable working with MariaDB or your application, you decided that you will integrate with that with a MariaDB, you can do that. Similarly, if you want to integrate with a MySQL server or MySQL, Oracle or Postgre, you can integrate with any of these engines. So AWS RDS service supports all these engines, and there is also one more engine called as Amazon Aurora, which is a database engine of AWS. Now, one type of database is not suitable for everybody, right? So there are different types of database instances, or we can call it as database instance classes. Now, what does a database instance class will define? This will define how much compute power you're getting with which class, what is the memory capacity. Okay, and the database instance class consists of both database instance type as well as the size. Now each instance type offer different compute, memory and storage capabilities. So based on what is the type of database that you're looking for, I mean the configuration, we can choose that. Now there are different types. For example, there is a database type called as you can see here, which is DBM6 too large. Okay, or there are different classes. There's something called as DBMGCS. You can call this as a general purpose database instance. Within DBMG6, there are large, small. There are a lot of options. We'll look into that. Now we can select the database instance that best suits our needs. Okay, and if let's say I have selected some instance type. Okay, and if I want to change it, can I change it? Yes, I can change it. We will see that once we do hands-on exercise. And now, what is the storage? Now, let's say obviously in a database, we store the data, right? Now, what type of storage that the database supports? Now, there is something called as Amazon EBS. It provides block level volumes that you can attach to a running instance. Now, DB instance comes with three different types of storages. One is called as a general purpose, okay, which the data is stored in SSDs. Second one is called as provisioned IOPS, which the data is stored in pipops. The third one is magnetic. Okay, magnet is so basically here the performance. If you're storing the data here, you'll get high IOPS. The performance is good. And if you want to reserve the IOPS, that means I want this number of IOPS, then you can do a provisioned IOPS. The cost will be little higher. Among all these three, magnetic is the performance is less, and the obviously the cost is also less with this. So the storage types differ in performance, characteristics, and price. Now we can tailor our needs based on the performance that we want. We can choose the storage type, and based on that, will also be the cost will also differ. Now the next thing is that can I create a RDS in a my own network? Yes. Now let's say on AWS you can create something called as a VPC as a network, right? So once I create a VPC, I can create a database instance in the VPC, or that means in our own network. So what happens if I create a RDS in my own network? I can select the IP address range, okay, and I can configure routing, okay, and you'll get all the basic functionalities of VPC. That it is more secured, okay, it is will have more control about the database. All right, that is about little theory about RDS database. Okay, now let us do hands-on lab. So we will do a lot of hands-on labs. There are 5 engines that it supports, right? We'll try and connect with all the 5 engines. I mean, we'll create a database with all the engines, and let's see connecting the database to a EC2 instance. All right, let me shift to my AWS console for that. Now, before uh, going to AWS console, let me draw the architecture, okay, of the hands-on exercise that we're going to do now. So let's consider this as the AWS region. Now, what we're going to do is that we are going to create a VPC. I mean, I'm going to use a default VPC which is there. Okay, let's say this is region. This is a VPC. Now inside the VPC, I'm going to create, we are going to use basically 2 subnets, public and private. Inside this, I'm going to create a EC2 instance. Okay, and inside this, I'm going to create a Okay, MariaDB instance. Now this MariaDB is connected with this EC2 instance. Okay, and we'll have an internet gateway. Okay, and this EC2 instance will communicate with the users. Okay, with the help of this internet gateway. Okay, that is the architecture. So we are going to create this MariaDB, create this EC2 instance, access the MariaDB from the EC2 instance, and this will be there in a, because this EC2 will have a public access. It will be there in a public subnet. This will be there in a private subnet. Okay, this is the first hands-on exercise that we are going to look into. Let me shift to my AWS console. Okay, this is my AWS console. Now we can go to all services and look for database here. Now inside database, there are a lot of options, right? The option that we're looking for is to create is a relational database, and it is under service called as RDS. Now we can just go here also and search for this RDS if you don't know under which category RDS comes. Now just click on this. You'll have your, that means we are creating a relational database now. Okay. Now you see here there's an option called as create database. Select this option, create database. Now there are multiple options: standard create or easy create. Standard create, you set all the configuration options including ones of availability, security. Easy create, as for the best practice configuration, AWS will choose some of them. Okay. Now I told you that this RDS supports multiple database engines, right? It could be PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, Postgre, Oracle, or Microsoft SQL Server. Let's say I'm choosing MariaDB here. Now, in the second hands-on exercise, we will look into other database engines. Okay, now let's go to MariaDB, and then you can choose the version that you want to create. Okay, you can choose, if I do a drop down, there are a lot of versions here. It's not mandatory that every time you have to choose a latest version. Choose the version which is recommended by your um, application developers. Now let's say there are three options here: production, dev test, and free tab. I will choose a free tab. Okay, these are basically the templates if you want to do use it for development or testing, if you want to use it for production or a free tab. Based on that, your cost, the cost will differ for the database that we are creating. And then we can give a name to the database. Okay, let's say I'll give this name as database test 1. Okay, you can choose the name that you want to give for this particular database. And then we need to choose a username. Let's say I will give my name as the username. Okay, and okay, and then give a password. Okay, you should not give any at the rate in this password. Okay, so I have given at the rate, so I'm just changing it. So there should not be any special characters. Okay, double quote and at the rate at the side. Okay, and then what type of instance? So I have told you there are different types of instances, right? Standard. Now if you look here, okay, there are different options. There is database T2 micro. With this you get 1 CPU, 1 GB RAM. Okay, and if you go to other things like DB T4G, you get 1 GB RAM. Okay, now if you see DB T4 16 GB RAM, X large, 32 GB RAM, etc. Right? But that is not enabled because this is a free tier. If you select either standard or test dev, it will be enabled. Okay. Now the storage, I told you there are three types of storage. One is called as SSD. Second one is called as provisioned IOPS. Third one is magnetic. In SSD, there are two types. Okay. Baseline performance and performance scales independently from storage. We can choose whichever option that we want, and we can choose the how much storage space it should get. 20 GB is the minimum. Maximum it can go up to 6144 GB. That is around 60 GB. And if you enable auto scaling for storage, if the 20 GB is finished, automatically it will increase the storage space, and it is up to us whether we need to choose auto scaling or not. All right, now availability and durability, because we have chosen here free tier, it is not enabled. Let's say I'm choosing production. Okay, now if I scroll down, you see multi-AZ deployment is there. So multi-AZ deployment means the database would be deployed in multiple availability zones. Okay, but as of now, because it is a demo for us, we can choose free tag. Now scroll down. Now you see here there's an option. Do you want to connect this to a compute resource? If I select compute, it will ask me to choose a EC2 instance, and there are no EC2 instances now, so it is not showing anything to us. So let me open another window here and let us create a EC2 instance here. Okay, select this option EC2. Okay, there is no instances running. Let me create one EC2 instance. You see there's an option here called as launch instance. Let me go to launch instance. Okay, now let me give a name to this instance. Let me give the name as I'll give the name as EC2 database connect. Okay, and I will choose the OS as Amazon Linux OS. Okay, and then scroll down to the network settings. In the network settings, I will have SSH traffic, that is fine. Okay, I will leave everything as defaults and select launch instance. Okay, select a key pair. I will use this key pair. I already have that uh, key pair on my system, so I'll choose that and select this option called as launch instance. Now it is launching the instance for us. Let us wait for a minute. It is showing success. Let me go to the instances here. Okay, the instance is pending in state. Let me refresh this. Okay, now we see the instance is running in state. Now let me go here. I'll select do not connect, connect an EC2 instance, and let's see, we can see the instance that we created, EC2 database connect. I want to connect this particular database that I'm creating with this EC2 instance. Select this. Okay, IPv4 is fine. Only VPCs with corresponding DB group are listed. Okay, after database is created, you can't change its VPC. Okay, now this is there in default VPC. You see this default VPC. We have to make sure that our system and this are there in the same VPC. Okay, now this particular instance should be also be there in a default VPC. Oh, okay, there is only one VPC, that is a default VPC which my system is there in. Okay, you see default VPC, yes. Okay, make sure that both your database and the EC2 is there in the same VPC. Okay, now I'll choose automatic setup. Okay, now it is asking whether this database should have a public access or not. I'll say no. Additional VPC group, I will leave everything for default. Authenticate using database passwords, okay. Monitoring, that's fine. Now let me go ahead and create this particular database. Now this database, basically it will give us an endpoint. Okay, it is saying creating a blue green deployment to minimize downtimes during upgrades. We'll discuss what is a blue green deployment later. Now this is the database that I have given, database test one. Okay, if you go here, the status is creating. Okay, this will take about a minute or two for the database to be created. Let us wait for a minute here. You see the database is still creating. Now, while this is creating, let us log into the server. Okay, let me go to this particular EC2 because we have to connect the database from this particular server, right? Let's see that. Let me log into the server first. Let me go to the EC2 instances, select the server, select connect, select option connect here. Okay, we are connecting to this particular server in the browser. Okay, I'm able to connect here as a EC2 user. Let me change to root user and root folder. Okay, let me first of all install the latest bug fixes and security updates by updating the software on this particular EC2 instance. For that, we can use a command called as sudo dnf update -y and enter. It says all dependencies resolved, nothing to do, complete. Okay. Now, in this particular server, let me install MariaDB. For that, sudo dnf install. Okay. Now it is asking yes or no. I'll say yes and continue. This installing database for me. Okay. Now, after that, I need to use a syntax to connect to this database. MySQL -h. Okay, we'll get an endpoint -p. The username I have given is this -p and the password. Now here we need to give the endpoint. So once the MariaDB is created, we'll get the endpoint here. Let me go here and check whether the database is created or not. Okay, it is in a state of backing up. Let's wait for one more minute here. Let's wait for 1 minute. Okay, it's still backing up. Right, now if you see, the status is available. Okay, and now here you see there is a something called as a endpoint, and at which port it will work. It will work at a port called as 3306. Now let me copy this go to this virtual machine. Okay, now here let me paste that endpoint, right? And then enter. It is asking for password. Let me give my password. Enter. It is saying unknown database. Let me enter the password again. Still I'm getting unknown database. 3306 is the error. All right. Here I think we are doing a small error here. Let me clear. Okay. Let me use the syntax again. Now for password, we can give hyphen p, which is a small one. For the port, I need to mention it as capital P. Okay. So MySQL is the client that I'm connecting to the Maria database. Hyphen H, the database name. Capital P, which determines at which port I need to connect. Hyphen U stands for username. Hyphen P stands for password. Okay. Now let me give the password. All right. Now you see, I'm able to connect to MariaDB database that we have created with the help of RDS. Now we can do any type of CURD operations here. Let's say, let me use the syntax to create a table. Okay, let us wait for a minute. Okay, we can use the syntax create table. Let's say I'm going to give the table name as employees. Okay, I'm just going to have two columns in this. One column is ID and it should be an integer. So int, and the second column should be name and it should be a data type of varchar, and I will limit to 50. Okay, I want to have another column like age, comma, age, and it should be integer again. That is data type. And I want salary. Okay, salary I want in a decimal data type. All right. Okay, and yeah, that's all. I'm closing this colon, enter. So I have not created any database in this. So first of all, let us create a database. So to create a database, let me give a syntax called create database and give it name of a database. Let's say I'll give the database name as demo. Okay, enter. Now the database is created. Now I want to use this database. To use this database, select option use, and my database name is demo. All right, let me run this. It should be colon. Okay, now the database name is changed. Now we can run this particular table that we are trying to create table employees, ID, name, etc. So this particular table now will be created in a database by name demo. Enter. Now it say query is okay, and it is showing that rows affected. So we have created a table, but there is no data in it. Now let's say select star from our table name is employees, right? We can give that. Enter. Okay, there is no data. It is not showing anything. Let us do one thing. Let us add some data here. Okay. Let us add some data here. Let me do a how to add data. Now let's say I will use a syntax called as insert. Okay, let's create a database. Okay, I'll create a database by name demo1. Enter. Worked fine. Let me create a table in this database. Let's say, okay, I'll create a table. Okay, let me use this database first of all. Okay, let's say use database demo1. Enter. Why it is saying, okay, unknown error again. First, let's see what databases are there. We can use a syntax called as show databases. Okay, we have this many databases. We have demo1, MySQL. These are the system databases. Okay, these two databases, demo and demo1, is the one which we created. Okay, now the syntax to use a database, we can just give use database and directly database name. Let's say demo1. Okay, now the database is changed. Let me create a table in this new database that we created. I will use the same syntax. I will use a create table. Okay, I'll use the table name as EMP. That's enough, and it should have this many columns. Let me do a enter. Okay, now let me add some data into this. Okay, fine. Let me enter the data. So to enter the data, we have to use a syntax called as input. It will be insert into. Okay, and our table name is EMP. The columns I have ID, name, age, salary. Okay, and I want to insert values. I'll give the ID as 1, name as Ram, age as 30, it's a salary around 50,000. I can put two decimal values. It'll take two decimal values and then close and enter. It says one query okay, one row affected. Now let me write a select statement. Select star from the table name employee. Call and then enter. Now you see whatever data is there in this table, we can see that. Okay. Now, similarly, if you want to update table, delete table, you can do anything with this table. So that is how basically we can create a MariaDB database and connect that from an EC2 instance and do all the query activities. Okay, this is hands-on one. Okay, now you see we are there in this database engine MariaDB, and the database is demo one. Okay, now what we will do, let me go to RDS database. So this is hands-on 2. Now instead of creating this database engine MariaDB, let us create a MySQL database. Let me go to this DB instances. Okay, we will connect to the same EC2 instance that we already created. Select option this create database. Okay, now let me select easy create. That means it will choose all the options by itself. Now previously we have used MariaDB engine. Now let me use MySQL engine. Okay, MySQL engine to connect to that. Now I will select free tier. That's fine. Okay, the password, I will use the same password and username that I'm using. And all right, confirm the password. Okay, set up EC2 connection. I'll say yes, I want to connect to EC2 resource. It is saying the passwords are not matching. Okay, now the passwords are matching, and the EC2 instance that I want to connect is the same EC2 instance that we created. All right, now let's say go ahead and create. Now close this. This is database one, which is MySQL engine. So we looked in MariaDB engine. Now we are connecting with MySQL engine. Let me go to this database. If you see, it is in status of creating. This will take about a minute time. This will take another minute for the database to be created. It is still creating. Let me refresh this. It's still creating. Now, if you see, the status is available, right? Now again, if you see here, there's an endpoint. So this is the endpoint that we need to use to connect to this database. Now let me go to this instance. Let me exit out of this particular. Okay, let me refresh this. I think I lost the connection. All right, let me change to sudo user. All right, now let me connect to the database. To connect to the database, I can use the same syntax because I have used the same username and the password. But now let me change the database name. Okay, this is the database one, etc., etc. All right, and let me enter, give the password, enter. Now you see here, now I am in which engine? MySQL engine. So there is no database. Let me create a database. Create database. I'll say new demo. enter. Okay, it is saying fine. Let me say use, what is the database name? New demo. Enter. Okay, now the database is changed. Now you see here MySQL and the database. Let's say create table, and we need to give a name of the table. Let's say I'll give the name of the table as student. Okay, and I'll give the first column name as ID and int, which is stands for integer. Okay, second column, let's say name, varchar, let's say 50. All right, that's all. I just want two columns. That's more than enough for me. Let me close column, enter. Okay, and let's say the table has created. Now let's use insert into, and the table name is student. Okay, I have two columns. One is ID, the second one is called as name. Okay, and let's say values, one, I'll give the name as Hari. All right, and enter. It says one row affected. Let me see that whether the data is there or not. Select star from, my table name is student, right? Enter. Okay, I need to give column, select star from student, enter. Now you see, I can see the table here. So, I mean, you can do all the CRUD operations. This lecture is about how to connect to different database engines, and with the help of the and connect to the database with the help of MySQL utility. Okay, this MySQL client. With the help of MySQL client, we are connecting. All right, that is how we can connect. So we basically have looked into these two types of database engines. So we have created MariaDB and MySQL database engines and connected them with the MySQL client. In the next lecture, we will see how to create Oracle, PostgreSQL, and Microsoft SQL Server and connect with the to these databases. All right. So to summarize, today we understood what is an AWS RDS instance, and we understood about different types of databases, and we created an RDS instance, we created a database, we created tables, and we did some little queries. All right, see you guys in the next class. Take care.